Well, David, I have a big one for you today. So I'll back up and explain what it is. So during the American Rescue Act, which was passed during COVID and signed by President Biden, the Congress temporarily increased the subsidies that go to Americans through tax credits and through the refundable tax refunds to help compensate for some of the cost of them purchasing health insurance. And it's specifically folks who purchase through the Obamacare marketplaces that have been set up by every single state and the federal government to purchase health insurance. And so what that act did was it not only increased the amount of reimbursement going to people that purchase through this, it also broadened the people that are eligible so that more wealthy individuals also got what was a lower level of reimbursement, but was some reimbursement. All we're saying is let's go back to the original reimbursement rate.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hey everyone, welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. Today's episode is another in our Big Ideas for Smaller Government series. And the idea is to talk about suggested spending cuts the government could make to reach our goal of cutting $2 trillion. Today, we're going to talk about a department that affects all of us, especially on April 15th, and that's the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS actually got its start back in the 1860s during the Civil War. President Lincoln and Congress needed a way to raise money for the war, so they created the Office of the Commissioner of Internal Revenue in 1862 and introduced the nation's first income tax. That early tax didn't stick around, but the idea came back for good in 1913 when the 16th Amendment gave Congress the power to collect income taxes. That same year, the Bureau of Internal Revenue began managing the tax system we know today. It was renamed the Internal Revenue Service in 1953, and then, since then, it's grown into a major federal agency responsible for collecting taxes and enforcing laws and spreading sadness all across the country. I want to welcome Jeremiah Mosteller, who is the Policy Director for Americans for Prosperity, to talk about what are some of the ways we could save money in the IRS. So, Jeremiah, always so happy to have you, man.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, but I will say this is my least favorite topic, talking about our tax system.
Like, you don't have a party on April 15th? I mean, how charitable do you feel that day?
Sadly, no, David. It is my least favorite day of the year, and I studied a lot of tax law in law school. That was one of my specialties. I volunteered at programs to help other people do their taxes, and I can say sometimes I can't figure it out, so I don't know how most Americans figure out this morass that is our tax system.
No, it really is sad that we have such a massive agency just to take our money, and that it's grown so much over in a relatively short period of time. You know, the amount of money that the government collects from hardworking Americans is pretty tragic. So, well, I'm sorry. Unlike some past episodes, we've been in the studio together, and I've always loved spending time with you. But we're not together today. But we're still going to have you go over to the whiteboard and talk about how big the IRS is.
You know, I love the whiteboard.
No, I mean, maybe we should probably have some kind of like a sad face on there or something, just because the IRS is probably, if we had to poll all the agencies that we've talked about, I am quite certain the IRS would be at the bottom of the list. So, all right, go ahead.
I'm sure, David. And I think it's worth starting with the listeners, just letting them know the IRS is part of the cabinet level department of the Treasury, which has a budget of $2.2 trillion a year. And the reason why our taxes are so high is because $1.3 trillion of the money it spends each year is for debt only. It is paying the debt that we owe to other countries, to investors, to folks around the world. And the Treasury does have other things other than the IRS, though the IRS is the largest component. Things like the U.S. Mint, which creates pennies, quarters, all of that, as well as the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, which focuses on our paper money. So there are other parts of Treasury, but like I said, the IRS is the biggest component other than our debt in its budget. And so the IRS's budget is actually $640 billion each year is spent on the IRS. And it's broken down into kind of three main components. You have the Taxpayer Advocate Service, which, funny enough, is actually someone that will step in to help you push back against the IRS whenever they're coming after you for an audit. Seems odd that that's in the same agency that is collecting the money from you, but I'll leave that there. I won't dig too far into that conflict of interest here. They also have taxpayer services, which focuses on how do people apply for their taxes? What are all the regulations? What are the forms? All of that. And then last but not least, everyone's favorite, taxpayer compliance. That's where the audits happen. That's where they garnish your wages. That's where they come after you when you don't pay your taxes. And so essentially it's broken down into three pretty simple components. Now, all of these components have a lot of staff and spend a lot of money enforcing and creating our tax law. But those are the three major components.
So I read something interesting that was found out about the IRS, and that's that thousands of IRS employees are not paying their taxes. How's that happen?
David, I'm not sure how it happens, but the Inspector General found that about 3,000 IRS employees owe back taxes to the agency. So their own employees are not filing their taxes properly or paying their taxes properly. And out of those 3,000, 2,000 are not even on a payment plan. So they have no plan to repay the money they owe the federal government. And so that's a lot of employees of an agency not complying with its laws and not even making a plan to comply. And within all of those employees, there's $13 million in back taxes owed by employees of the agency that actually collects the revenue. So
theoretically, you could have somebody doing the enforcement who's on the phone with you talking about how, bad it is and how the punitive measures that are going to be assigned to you because you haven't paid your taxes and they may not have paid their taxes. Ironic.
That is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Is there anything that the IRS or Congress could do to ensure that people collecting our taxes are at least held to the same standard as the average taxpayer?
Well, David, I would probably say these folks should be held to a higher standard, but I agree with your sentiment. I think if you're enforcing the law, you should be complying with the law at an A++ level, not a C or D or F level. But there is some action being taken here. So the Senate has introduced legislation that would say that if you have a serious delinquency in your taxes, you do not qualify to be a federal government employee. And so that would apply to the IRS. It would also apply to a number of other agencies. We don't know what the number is across the federal government, but we know that there's probably thousands and thousands of more people across the federal government that owe back taxes and are not paying them right now. So this would just say hey, you can't be employed by the people that actually are taking the money from the American people. And I feel like that feels like that's a fair standard. And it's serious delinquency. So it's not, hey, if you owe us $10, it's, hey, you owe us thousands of dollars and you're not paying them and we're not seeing a path to you paying them. And so that would be a super great piece of legislation. It has not been reintroduced this Congress yet because it was introduced last Congress by then Senator Braun, who is now governor in Indiana, and Senator Ernst. And so we hope and have been pushing Senator Ernst to reintroduce that legislation because we think it's important to hold these employees accountable.
Yeah, I think it is. If anything, just to kind of send it's more of a message thing. Look, no one's breaking the bank because of some of the IRS agents or employees haven't paid all their taxes. But it's just to have confidence in your government and to not feel like, to feel like your government is living up to what they're supposed to be doing and holding themselves to the standard at least that you're being held to, if not a higher one. It just is about having confidence in government.
Yeah.
So our listeners may have heard about this, but DOJ discovered that $4.7 trillion was unaccounted for. Well, shouldn't every dollar the government spends be written down and recorded and traceable? And I can't believe it's not.
So it should be. Every single bit of money that goes out of the federal government is supposed to have a Treasury account symbol tied to it. What this essentially is it's a number that says this money going out the door is tied to this line item in the budget that Congress has given you. But like you said, what they found was nearly $5 trillion is missing this number. So there's no way for us to know X agency sent out this money to this person. Well, where did it come from? How did they get this money in the first place? Why are they paying this money out? Because they're not filling out that simple field in their accounting systems to connect the money going out the door to the money that they had been budgeted in the first place.
That would seem like a systemic problem if that much money is going out the door that entire departments, agencies, whatever, are just ignoring is basically the tracking that we're trying to do. But I mean, that's unbelievably troubling, that you want to destroy confidence in government. I guess a lot of people don't have confidence always in their government. But that really erodes trust, that $4.7 trillion. It's just a mind-boggling amount of money. Is no one knows where it is. And that's just crazy.
Yeah. And David, in any other entity, business, nonprofit, family budget, if this was happening even at a much lower cost level, there would be red alarms going off. There would be audits happening.
No.
People would be freaking out because this money is not able to be tracked. But it seems that our federal government has given itself a little bit of a pass here. Sure.
Well, unfortunately, as we've looked at a lot of these agencies, it seems to be a kind of a common occurrence and a reoccurring theme. So, but my understanding is that Senator Rick Scott and Senator Roger Marshall have a bill that they've introduced that might help with this. So can you talk to us about this bill and what it would do?
Yeah. It's pretty straightforward. It's called the Ledger Act. Yes, it is a play on ledger as in the accounting statement. And so it would essentially require the Department of Treasury, of course, working with the IRS and all the other agencies, to either make that field mandatory. So folks have to actually put in that number and tie it to their budget line item, or create a new system that can actually track from the appropriations by Congress all the way through to the final payment. So it's pretty straightforward. It would just essentially implement the best accounting practices that any accountant would tell you any organization should apply, and just statutorily requires it because clearly the agencies are not going to do it voluntarily.
I mean, it seems like utterly common sense legislation. So, I mean, do you think that the reason that we're having this issue is because the government is just so big, technology's become outdated, or is there something else? Is there anything nefarious?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix of different things. The reality is that the field was not currently mandatory whenever DOJ discovered this. It is now supposedly mandatory, at least in the Treasury system, maybe not in other agency systems. And so it could be a mix of the incentives at play, that it just takes you a little more time to input this number, and so people don't want to do it. But it could also be that people didn't want transparency. And so if you don't add that number, you can spend the money how you want to spend it, and no one will ever be able to say, well, actually, that money should have went here versus here. And so I think it's probably a mix of both of those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that seems pretty plausible. I mean, I think there's people who there's probably people who just were like, hey, I didn't know I had to do this because it seems pretty systemic, But, I also, though, transparency is the enemy of people who are doing bad things, or when people don't want to be found out. And unfortunately, there's been folks who have been involved in government and associated government, and contractors and other things, friends of people in government who probably like things being under kind of the cloak of darkness, and certainly don't want that light shined on to what's to their activities and their spending. So that's great that the Trump administration's instituted that. So I'm encouraged by that. I'm encouraged by a lot of the things that they're doing in this vein. So hopefully it'll pay dividends. We'll be able to actually tell where our money's going. It's just unbelievable. So any other cuts that you think should be made to the IRS, and how much savings would that result in?
Well, David, I have a big one for you today.
Excellent.
So I'll back up and explain what it is. So during the American Rescue Act, which was passed during COVID and signed by President Biden, the Congress temporarily increased the subsidies that go to Americans through tax credits and through the refundable tax refunds to help compensate for some of the costs of them purchasing health insurance. And this is specifically folks who purchase through the Obamacare marketplaces that have been set up by every single state in the federal government to purchase health insurance. And so what that act did was it not only increased the amount of reimbursement going to people that purchase through this, it also broadened the people that are eligible, so that more wealthy individuals also got what was a lower level of reimbursement, but was some reimbursement. And so all we're saying is, let's go back to the original reimbursement rate. Let's provide these tax enhanced credits to the individuals that originally were intended to receive them. the pandemic is over. This was supposed to be a temporary pandemic enhancement. Let's pull that back and let's go back to what we initially had agreed to as a country should be these tax refunds for these individuals that purchase health insurance through the marketplaces.
That sounds like a pretty plausible and common sense idea. I can't believe I keep saying that. That makes a lot of sense, Jeremiah. Let's go back to having it be who it's intended for. And we're out of a time of crisis. And so how much could that save taxpayers?
Yeah, David, this would save $383 billion. So this is a big one.
Wow. So you're saying that we'd save 380, you said 83?
$383 billion with a B, billion with a B.
By just asking people who can afford their health care and who I would say objectively don't need the subsidies because they didn't have them, over the last decade, just asking them to pay that would save the government that much money. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. So the folks that are now receiving it have up to 400% income over the poverty line. So these are individuals who are average middle class Americans who probably receive health insurance through their employer or through other ways, but we're still incentivizing them to go to the marketplace rather than take whatever the other alternatives would be that they could access.
Wow, that's fabulous. That would be great. What would that bring our total to?
David, I am so excited to tell you this number. So it brings us to $1,737.5 billion. We are this close to that $2 trillion mark.
Wow. We always ask about, how can listeners, kind of reach out and bring some ideas. I would just like to personally offer up the idea that we just cut a lot more from the IRS. I don't care. We cut enforcement agents, all kinds of stuff. I mean, we do need, the government does need some revenue, but the IRS certainly seems pretty aggressive and pretty bloated to me. And I think that the American people would agree with me. I could probably run for office on that and probably win. So,
yeah, I think so.
If a listener has a great idea like that for a spending cut, where's the best place for them to go and submit it?
Yeah, David. So I know we've said this over and over again, but it is dogeidea.com. We want to hear from your listeners. We want to hear from other average Americans across the country because we believe the best ideas come from real Americans because those are real solutions that can then be taken to their members in Congress and President Trump and his administration because real solutions from real people are what solve the problems in this country. Couldn't
agree more. That's great. And I appreciate you talking about the IRS and the savings that could be realized, significant savings. I think when we talk about reining in bloated and I'd say overly aggressive parts of our government that probably are not serving the taxpayers like they should, unfortunately, I think the IRS is kind of top of that list. So we need to right size it.
Yeah, I think it would be a unanimous result in a poll to say cut the IRS.
Well, hey, folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.